Okay, so this video starts at step 3 of GIS Lab 2. So if steps 1 and 2 had gone okay, then you should have a screen that looks similar to the one that I'm displaying here, which shows the state of Washington and all the counties, and they're labeled. If you had trouble with the data showing and you were getting red exclamation points over here, that's a problem with mapping your drive, and you just need to remap your Z drive so that it only goes to DaVinci /ArcGIS. Commonly, students might link to their personal folder or to the class folder, and in that case you'd have to remap and make sure it was only going to that ArcGIS folder. And then you'd have to reload the ArcMap file so that it's pulling the data from the correct place. The other thing is you might have had trouble remembering the steps to label the different counties, and so I just refer you back to GIS Lab 1. So similar to last GIS Lab, we have over here on the table of contents, it's showing the data that's being displayed. We can put the data on or off. But it's called County 10, and that's referred back to the actual file that we loaded either from our catalog like we did in the first lab. And if we bring up the layer properties by right-clicking over there on County 10 and going to the General tabs, we'll see that it defaults to a layer name of County 10. But we can actually change this to whatever we want. We could change it to counties, or we could change it to Washington counties, and hit apply. And we'll see that it updates in the table of contents. And so this is a way of, instead of just being bound by what the actual data layer was called, is that we could call it whatever. And this becomes important when you have a lot of data, but also when you're trying to create maps and legends, because it's going to pull from this table of contents. And so you want to make sure that it's just somebody looking at your map that it has a reasonable name. So for the next step, we actually want to create a choropleth map, and what that term refers to is a map that uses color to display the magnitude of a particular variable. And for our map, we're going to use the population of the Washington counties. And so we want to create a symbology or a map display that lets the viewer quickly see where the highest and lowest population counties are. So if we remember back to GIS, right, that we're displaying the counties, but these counties also have an entire attribute table associated with them. And kind of looking at it, we see it looks like census data, again, similar to what we did with GIS Lab 1. So it has lots and lots of different attributes, and any of these attributes could be used to create the choropleth map. We're going to be using population, which is going to be this population 10. So if we go back over to the counties, right-click and hit Properties, and instead of being on the General tab, we're going to use the Symbology tab. So when we bring data into GIS, it defaults as what we call a single symbol, so that every feature within that layer is shown the same way. And so for that single symbol, all the counties are shown with a black outline and a green fill. And we did some changes to that on GIS Lab 1. But now we're going to get a little bit more complicated and start using the magnitude of different variables within the attribute table. So if I click on categories, I can see that I could create just what we call a categorical or unique values. And so you get a little glimpse of it down here, which is just showing the states. Every state is given or assigned a different color, but they're kind of assigned in a random way, so that the color itself doesn't mean anything. It just is unique to each different state. So another option is quantities, and so under quantities we see general or graduated colors. And graduated colors use a color ramp, right, from high to low, and as the values increase, right, the intensity of the color, the darkening of the color also increases. So this is showing a preview of the countries within Africa, and the darker as it moves towards brown and away from yellow, these are countries that have higher populations. So we want to do something similar with our map. So up here, when we set it, we need to tell it which value or which column it's going to. Look, and so all of these names just represent columns on the attribute table. So we have this population 10, which is just the population of the various counties within Washington. So we could pick different ramps. I happen to like the green, but it doesn't matter. All of these represent sort of low to high intensity, or you could even change from yellow to blue. So select whichever one you want for your map. And then down below, it's going to use ranges. So this is actually pulling values from the attribute table, and it's saying that within the state of Washington, there's a county that has low population. The lowest population in that table is 2,266, and the county with the highest population has over 1.9 million. It's breaking it down into 5 classifications and what we call natural breaks, and it's just using this 5 up here. You could pick whatever you wanted down to, you can also look under classify and it'll show you a histogram. So these blue lines represent the breaks, and you can see how your data is dispersed. But for this, we're going to go ahead and leave it at the 5, and then go down here and think about the range and the label. So the range is actually where the values are changing. So it's changing from a yellow to this light green if the population is over 60,699. We want to go ahead and change these to kind of more even or whole numbers, which is good sort of map making. It's just easier for the person viewing your data to wrap their heads around even values. So we're going to change it to 10,000. So we don't have any ability to change this 2,266, right? This is just based on data from the table. But we can tell it to change colors for any value it sees over 10,000. It automatically updated the lower range of the next bin to 10,001. And so all we can change is the upper value. So we can say, okay, well, tell me counties above. So this will show counties in this color that are between 10,001 and 100,000. And we'll pick 250,000, 500,000. And then for the upper range, right, this is just the value, the very highest value. So it doesn't matter changing that. We only have counties that go up to 1.9 million. So the range is how it's actually going to break the data, and the label is how it's going to display on the map. So instead of, if we don't care for the person seeing our map to know what the absolute lowest one is, we can just say it's going to show all counties 10,000 or less in this color. And maybe we want to show it this as anything greater than 500,000, like this. Okay. So that'll show the label. The other thing is if I right-click on the label, so I just was pointing over here, I can format these labels so that I can add the 1,000 separators. I could also change it to show, currency or number of decimal places or anything. I can control the way it looks. I think with values that are in the thousands, certainly in the millions, it's better to show it with the 1,000 separators. So if I hit apply, you can see in the background I've kind of created that. I might change the colors, pick one that looks good. I happen to like that one. Okay, for the next step, instead of just focusing on Washington, we're going to go back and bring in that United States data layer. So the last lab, we talked about these folder connections, right? So these are things that are defined. I use GIS a lot, so I'm going to have a lot more folder connections than you do. But at the very least, you want to make sure that you have a folder connection to the Z drive. We did this in the last lab, but if you don't remember how to do that, it's by selecting this Connect to Folder. But you want to at least be connected to the Z drive, if not the Z class data drive. Okay. So we have this Washington folder. This is where the county, lots of Washington County things came from, and this is where the County 10 that we've been working with was in there. But for this next steps, we want to use this United States geodatabase layer. Hopefully your computer is faster than mine. But we're over here in this ARC catalog, if you didn't see how I pulled this up from there. If for some reason you don't have these buttons, you can also access our catalog from an icon up here. But you can drag and drop any things from here. So we want to bring in the United States layer. we're going to get this warning system, or this warning box, and we'll talk about this in a second. For now, we're just going to say, okay. And we also want to bring in U.S. counties. So if I go and do zoom full extent or zoom out using my window, the first thing I'm going to see is that the United States doesn't look the same as it did last lab. So last lab we were using a projection, all right, a way of taking something from a round object, or the Earth shape, out to a flat object on the paper. And so projections are probably one of the most confusing things about GIS, but it tells how to convert from sort of a round object to a flat object. So when we were dealing with Washington, right, when we were focused back there, we had it so that the main boundaries of Washington were essentially flat. We're used to looking at maps of the United States where the projection is for the entire United States, and where we start to see that it's essentially flat across here. So when we want to deal with projections, right, and converting data from one visual frame of reference to another, we need to go over here to the layers. So everything we've been doing with properties, we've been clicking on the different layers in here, but now we want to right click on the actual word layers and bring up the properties. So this is going to have a slightly different property box, because now we're dealing with the entire map and not just the data frames within the map or the layers. So over here we can start to see things about the data frame, but the coordinate system. And we're going to spend more time in lecture talking about different kinds of coordinate systems. But for this we want to go up. We can talk about geographic and projected coordinate systems, but we want to pick a coordinate system that is more for the United States and not for Washington State. So there's different sort of defined ones in terms of continental, right? We can look at North American, right? And so we want to find the NAD 1983 HARN. So projected coordinate system, sorry. Contiguous Albers. And it's going to transform all the data. Right, and so now we see that the United States more in its typical form. Okay, so we're on step 5 of GIS Lab 2. So you should have a map that looks like this. The previous steps we imported in both the United States map and the Washington, or the United States and the U.S. counties. We're going to go ahead and turn off the Washington counties, and we're actually going to go ahead and just compress up the population so we don't have to see all the different, the choropleth graduations for the Washington counties. So in this case we want to have a map. Right now the counties are on top, so we see that. We also have the states, right? And so similar to last lab when we were talking about the order within the table of contents matters. So we want to create a map that has strong outlines for the states, but also where we can see the counties. So one way we can do this is we can, by double-clicking on the U.S. states, we can just change it so that there's no color for the fill. So that's going to allow us to see the counties through there. And we also want to bump up the outline width and change it maybe from gray to a solid black. And we can change it to, I think 1.5 it says in the directions. And so you can see now that we have the counties below, but you can see the strong outline of the states. So on your own, go ahead and create a choropleth map that shows the graduated color system, right, of the U.S. counties as opposed to just the Washington counties. But for this, you don't have to worry so much about changing the thresholds and making sure that they're reasonable. Just go ahead and use one of the default values or default thresholds. Okay, we're now starting step 7 of GIS Lab 2. So you should have a map that shows the United States, the states outlined, bold, and then some sort of choropleth map of the population for the counties of the United States. So the colors you choose might be different, and you might have gone ahead and updated or worked with the thresholds, but you should have something that looks like this. And for this next step, we want to talk about visible scales. Right? So as we've been moving around, right, if we kind of increase our, right, and we zoom in, we'll see changes up here on our map scale. And we're going to be talking about scales quite a bit in lecture class. But as I change these, I start to see, and the closer in I get, right, my value decreases. So if I want to go ahead and pick a scale that shows me sort of Oregon, Washington, and Idaho, I'm going to be somewhere around, I think, you know, if I can even go in and set it, but if I set it to 5 million, right, I can see, these states. Right? So I can just go ahead and use the zoom feature, or I can set it at a scale that I want. So sometimes you have elements that you want to see when you're zoomed in close that you wouldn't want to see at a national scale. So if I change the U.S. counties and I went over to there and I right-clicked and we went to visible scale range, I can say set minimum scale. And now when I zoom out, I don't see the counties, but as I zoom in, once the scale is beyond what it was when I set that threshold, I'll see the counties. So this can become useful for you know, maybe viewing cities. If you're zoomed into a state, you would want to see a feature, but as you zoom out. So all that is set just by going to that visible scale range. I can always clear it if I don't like it. If I say clear, that means that I'll see every feature at every range. And so this is something that I can set for each one. Maybe I would only want to see the Washington counties if I was zoomed in close enough to see Washington. So that becomes a useful thing when you're creating more of an online GIS. So when you're using it to, you know, when you have people who are going to be using your system to view things on the web as opposed to a printed map. Okay, for step 8 of GIS Lab 2, we're going to add one more data layer. So I go over to the ARC catalog, I go back to the US Geo database, and I find the layer for US cities. I drag that over. It's going to give me the warning about the data needs to be transformed. Essentially, it needs to be converted from whatever projection system it was stored in to the projection system of our map. Right? So that brings in all the major U.S. cities, certainly not all of them. Another feature that's nice when we start getting lots and lots of data is by creating group data. So if I go over here to the layers in my table of contents, and I click on that, I can see, I right-click, I see an option for a new group layer. So if I hit yes to that, I get a new group layer. I can go to Properties. I can name it whatever I want, but I'm going to call it National Data. It has very few tabs to it because right now it's actually just a storage place, right? It's a way of creating you know, some hierarchy to your data. So I can turn it on or off. There's no data associated with it yet. But what I want to do is put some of the national level data under this heading. So if I pick things up, right, you'll see I can drop it in there, and now U.S. cities becomes sort of subordinate to the national data. And I can do the same with the U.S. states and the U.S. counties. Right? And then I probably want to put the cities as point data on the top. Right? So now I can see that. What's nice about it is that I can group this data. So by turning this off, it turns everything off. Right? Washington counties is up on its own layer or level, so it's not associated with this national data group layer. So if I turn that on and turn this off, right, you'll see that it's not affected by turning this on and off. So as your maps, your GIS files become much more complicated, you can use this group structure to turn things on and off easily instead of having to go through and click everything. Okay, so now we're on step 10 of GIS Lab 2. I've gone through the first step, or part A of this, where I've changed the outline of my states to be less bold, so I've used a 1-point line width and a gray color. I intentionally didn't show those steps so that you would, on your own, remember how to change those. I've also turned off the counties, so all I see are the U.S. states and the U.S. cities. So the next step is to be able to create a graduated symbol map. So similar to a choropleth map where we use color to display the magnitude of a particular variable, in this case we're going to use a symbol size to display the magnitude. So over on U.S. cities, we're going to do properties and bring it up, and under symbology. So these are point data, so the symbol, right, so that it's defaulting to that single symbol, and it's showing up as red or whatever the default is for any particular computer. I think everybody's are set up the same, but you might have a different color. So instead of doing a single symbol, we want to use graduated symbols. So similar to how we did graduated colors, we need to tell it which variable to use. We want to use population, and so this is once again referring to the columns in the attribute table. So we're going to use population 2000. Okay. And so it's going to, once again, create natural breaks depending on how this is set. I think it defaults for everybody probably to 5 classes, but we could change that. We could look at the data and see you know, a histogram, and it would show us in general we have lots and lots of cities with small populations, and then you know, kind of a few what we would call outliers of large cities. Okay. So in this case, it has the 5 breaks, and it's going from a symbol size of 4 point up to 18 point. So if I wanted it to have more difference, I could increase this, you know, to 25, and then my larger cities would be even larger symbols. For this lab, go ahead and leave the lower range at 4, but max it out at 12 so that we don't get too large of a symbols that are overlying each other. We're also going to once again go through and change our ranges so that we see cities under 200,000, 400,000, 600,000, 800,000. And we see our largest city at over 8 million. Once again, we'll go ahead and change the labels. I'll right-click and use the 1000 separators. One, two, few too many. Few. There we go, and then change it to things over 800,000. And if I zoom extents, I'll see that it's created different size symbols according to the map, the variable. Okay, so we're at step 11 of GIS Lab 2. So starting with our map of the United States, we have the states outlined and the U.S. cities. So commonly we may only need a subset of this data. So for this next step, we're actually going to be creating a map of Washington State with the cities that have population greater than 15,000 shown. So with the data that we have available, though, we only have the U.S. cities. So we're going to be using definition queries. And definition queries just uses query logic to limit the data that's shown. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to go ahead and get rid of our U.S. states, bring up our Washington County. We're going to zoom in to Washington. And you'll see that we're still back in this national projection. So if we're going to be trying to create a map just of Washington State, we want to go ahead and change that projection back to the Washington State plane projection. So I do that by right-clicking on Layers, going to my Properties, and making sure I'm on my coordinate system. And so instead of having a North American system, right, we want to go to our state plane system. We're going to be using our NAD, our North American datum. We want to use 1983, the HARN. We're going to be going through and talking about all these things in class. But this HARN is the high accuracy reference network. And there's different systems, usually 2 for each state, unless you have sort of the smaller states. But if we go to Washington, we'll see we have a north and the south. We'll go ahead and pick the south. So it's for the state plane, the southern Washington state plane coordinate system. If I hit apply, it's going to give me some warnings that it needs to transform the data from one system to the other. Right? So now we get a nice view of Washington. So one thing I'm going to go ahead and default and create a bookmark. I already had one created, but I'll show you how to do that. Replace it. And so what this does is, if I can zoom out, I'll still see, you know, I have all the data from the lower 48, but bookmarks allow me to zoom quickly back into a particular view. So in order to change this U.S. city layer to just the Washington state cities that are over 15,000, I need to go back to the properties of that layer. I want to point out under General, there's a description here that came with the data, and it just said these are all the U.S. cities with populations 10,000 or greater. It also notes the state capital and the national capital. So over here is the definition query, and if I were comfortable with the syntax of the definition query within this program, I could just type it out, but in most cases you're going to be using the query builder. Right? So the query builder just helps you through the syntax logic of the queries. So it starts with all the different layers. So these all represent the columns. Okay? And we can go back over, just want to take a look at the data real quick on the attribute table. It's showing me that this whole layer, right, has all these different columns, right, including population and the states, whether or not it's a capital, and some ID and different areas. And it says that that layer contains 3,533 different cities. So going back to the query builder, if I want to just limit it to the states, I remember that that column ST represents the states, so I want to create a condition. So the states must equal, and it must equal Washington. I think it's better to use this function over here, get unique values, and it's going to give me all the values that are found in that column. Right? So essentially it's going to show me all the different states. And so state equal to Washington, and I hit OK. If I'm referring to text values, there has to be these apostrophes. But by using the query builder and this get unique value, I don't have to remember the exact syntax of it. I can say state equal to Washington. Okay. And if I zoomed out again, I would see that I no longer have any of those cities out there. I only have cities in Washington. If I go to my attribute table, I don't have the 3,000 plus cities anymore. I only have the 99, and I'll see that I only have ones in Washington. The next part of it was the population. Right? So if I look at my attribute table, see if it's going to catch up with me here. And start ascending. I'll see that I have some cities that have populations that are less than 15,000 but are above that 10,000 that the whole data layer has. So if I go back to the query builder, I need to add that part to it. So it'll come up with a query that I had before, and so now I need to add another condition to it. And this is an AND condition, meaning that both have to be satisfied. So if I had OR, it would allow cities above 15,000 but in any state to be included. So I need to find my population. and greater than 15,000. And this is a text value, so I can just put it in, a numerical value as opposed to a text value, so I don't need to have those apostrophes. So I hit apply. And if I go back in here and look at my attribute table, I'll see that instead of 99, I now have 69, and I won't have any that are below 15,000. So the first population, or the lowest population I have, is 15,085. If I were to remove those queries, if I could go back into here and go to Query Builder and just delete these, you don't have to do this on yours, but all the cities in the U.S. would come back. So I'm never deleting the data, I'm just deleting the visibility of them, but also the visibility of them within the attribute table. So any statistics I run, it would never know that those ones were there. Well, now that I've changed what this it's actually showing, I should probably call it Washington cities instead of U.S. cities. And I should probably remove it from the national data. So now I can see all my cities. So the second part of this is creating a map that uses symbology. Right. So it's still maintained the overall symbology that I had for the national, and then I could try to decide whether that was sort of good enough for Washington State. And what you'll actually see is that Washington has sort of lots of smaller cities and not very many in larger cities. So it's not really a very good symbology for Washington State, just because we don't have a lot of cities sort of above 400,000. So I could go back to properties, sort of change my symbology. I could look at it and try to see. You can actually kind of drag it over and try to see, where good breakpoints are. But you can see I have, I start to see differences like above 50,000. So I probably want to change this to maybe 50,000, 100,000, 200,000, 400,000. As soon as I change the thresholds, it'll always overwrite the labels so that it looks. Forgot a 0. And then at least we get a little bit more variation in the data and the symbology. Okay, for step 13 of GIS Lab 2, we're going to be working with different symbols. Specifically, we want to create a symbol that shows what the capital is. So we could do this on the national level. We're just going to be doing it for the state of Washington to use a different symbol to show what Olympia is. So since we still want to maintain our symbology for the population, we're actually going to go ahead and add the U.S. cities. We could also, it turns out there's a layer of U.S. capitals, but we'll go ahead and add a second U.S. cities, just to show the point that you can have multiple layers of the very same data source. So we want to change this from U.S. cities to capital, and we want to work on the definition query. So we're going to do a query builder. Once again, we want it to just show cities in Washington. And there's another, let's see if I remember if it's at the beginning or end. Capital is another attribute column in the attribute table for this cities layer. And we wanted to set it equal to, and this is it's a variable that's either yes or no. That city is either a capital, a state capital, or it's not. So if we set it equal to yes, so it's only going to show cities that are in Washington that are have a capital equal to yes. We can hit apply. If we can turn this off just so you can see what's happening, we get only one city in Olympia. So we can also double click on the symbol so that we can either make it larger, but we actually want to make it look like a capital. And so if there's a bunch of different symbols in here, and sometimes if I'm looking for specific ones, you can just type it in and look for capitals, and you'll see there's different symbols associated with that term. And so I can call it capital 1. 25 is a little bit large. And you'll see that it has that. So then when I turn the cities on, you'll see that I have both. Now what it does do is it takes it, so we no longer really have population information about Olympia, but we at least can see that it's the capital. Okay, we're on step 14 of GIS Lab 2. So we're going to switch gears a little bit and move from sort of data and symbology to kind of creating the maps that are either going to be printed out on their own or become parts of like your engineering reports. So we're going to do a few steps that we're actually not going to want to save. So the easiest thing right now is to just hit save, and then after we kind of show these next set of commands, and we'll kind of come back to our map, how it looks right now. So you don't have this yet, so I want to show how to get it. So we're going to look at some of the built-in features for map creating by going to customize toolbars, and there's a whole bunch of toolbars within GIS that you can use. We're actually going to be using the layout toolbar, so you can leave it floating or you can go ahead and dock it. Most of the options are going to be grayed out because we're working right now within what we call data space. So down at the bottom, depending on your map units that you have set up, as we move around, you're going to see these coordinates change. And these are actually your state plane coordinates, which become negative as you move too far out of Washington. I think if you move over this way, they'll become negative as well. But it's a system that we're going to talk about a lot more in class. Each sort of unit on the map as we move back and forth represents sort of on the ground 1 foot. So that's what we call data view. If we were in paper view, this would look like a piece of paper, like an 8.5 by 11 or a larger sheet. So anyway, as we move into paper view, you'll see these commands will become available. So way at the end is a change layout tool. If we select that, it's going to show us the built-in templates. So these are just sort of starting points if you're trying to create a map. Hopefully your computer is faster than mine right now. But we'll wait as it comes up. So selected views, yours probably defaulted to sort of over on these sides. You can have user-defined templates, but we want to look at the templates that are set up for showing maps at the U.S. scale, right? And so if I look at these are different. I can have a map that defaults to the Northwestern. If you wanted to have your full 50 states, right, you can create this map, which has different data views, different inserts showing Alaska and Hawaii. But our data is just for the U.S., so we'll go ahead and show just for the continuous 48. So this creates a map. We start to see some legends, some titles, scale maps, projection information, and it's showing the data that we have. If I were to click onto here and turn on some of my other layers, you'll see this, that the data is still there. So down here at the bottom is different views, and so I talked about data view and layout view, or what I call paper view, right? So as we move back and forth, you'll see that these commands up here are grayed out if I'm in data view. These are the ones we've been using, and then as I move to the paper. So this is just something that I would be printing out and has lots of extra map features to it. Right now the table of contents is down below, so these are all objects that we can work with. I can bring it to the front, and we can see that it's pulled all the information directly from the table of contents. So this is why we spent that time making these labels look reasonable, although we didn't do it for the U.S. populations. But it's pulling all the data that we have at the time, all the layers that were in there when we created it. If I turn things off, you'll see that this is an active object and it's updating. Right, so I can control what's both seen on the map, but also what's in the table of contents. If I want to zoom around within the map itself, so I wanted to get a closer view of this table of contents, I would use this zoom in on this layout toolbar that we just created. And you can see it has a little piece of paper behind it. It looks just like the regular tool, but has the paper. And that's how we know whether we're zooming or navigating within the data view or within the paper view. So we might just do that and look. Another thing we can do at this point is in printing. Right, we can go and print from here. Now that we actually have something that represents, paper units as opposed to, large-scale maps, I would always suggest kind of using print preview, because probably the most common thing is that there's a difference between your layout view and your paper rotation. I think it's easier to print to PDF and then make sure it looks the way you want it to look, and then print from the PDF, because it's pretty easy to waste a lot of paper doing that. But anyway, I can go to print setup, right? And so in this case, I can see that my paper was this way, but my map is that way. So I would want to change it to layout, and then I could do that, and then from there with my print preview it should look good. Under that there was also printing, so printing to Windows, depending on what you have set up. Sorry, you can also export the map. That's the command I wanted to, where it would automatically export to different graphics files. Right? Probably the most common one, I think, and the easiest one is just to print to PDF or export to PDF, and then you can use that within your reports. So at this point, I want you to go ahead and just close without saving, and then reopen your file so you can get rid of how it looked prior to having the template defined. Okay, now we're on step 18. So you would have closed without saving the previous steps, working with the template, and then reopened your drawing so that we were back to where we were before. So with these steps, we're going to work on creating a map without using a template. So adding our own sort of features one by one, and it allows the map to be more customizable and is much more common to do than using the templates. So with the last steps, we talked about there being a data view, and we can see that we're in the data view because the coordinates are sort of in ground truth. And if we switch back, we can still look at the paper view or the layout view, but instead of seeing all the template features that we saw in the last steps, we're just given a blank page and a data frame. Right? Yours may not be highlighted, but this is actually like where it's going to be pulling from the data view, and versus this is just the white piece of paper that we can add elements to. So if we click somewhere outside of the piece of paper, we can get this context menu come up and look at the page setup. So we have both the paper setup, so this is what the paper will look like coming out of the printer, and we also have the map page. And we can see that both of these need to be changed if we want to change it to a landscape view. This data view is an object that we could move around, we can resize. If we want to change the view of our data, we have to use these data commands, not the paper commands, right? This is just going to zoom closer into the paper, but if we want to change how much size, right, Washington, fits within this data view, right? We have to use these commands, and we can change so it takes up more of the space. Some other features when we're doing layout, we might want to add what we call guides, right? These are these blue things that we can move around that help us line up our elements, right? So we can create one at maybe 8.5, and we can create another vertical one at 7. That just sort of lets us use these to increase, and so that we have a nice map that everything's lined up. So we can get that state of Washington to take up more of the space. Right? So this is just sort of navigation parts of it. So if underneath the insert, this is where we're going to get the different features that came up on our template. So under insert, we could add another data frame, and this is what, when we saw that one template that showed Alaska and Hawaii, this is a way that we can kind of put elements. We could insert another data frame, and it would be on a different sort of coordinate system than the others. We could also do blow-up views, like we could have another data frame where we have a increased scale, or a view of like Puget Sound or something where there's a lot of data that we need to show at a bigger level. But for now, we're just going to add some of the more common things. So what title would you like to give your map? We can say Washington State, maybe populations, right? Because we're showing both city populations and county populations. So it can create that element in there. With it, I can double click on it, right? And I can change some of the font to it. If I change symbol, I can change the different font to it. I can make it bold, change my styles, all that, so that I can customize it. But for now, we'll leave it, I guess, relatively small. So we can add that. The other one is we want to make sure that it has a legend. So if I select legend, it leads me to the legend wizard. And so it's going to pull from the map layers. These are all the things that I can have. And I can either add them, I can remove them, right, by making sure. So this is what's actually going to show up in the legend. So I want to have the counties in there, I want to have the cities, and I want to show what the population is. And then the order of it I can change with these arrows by highlighting and moving them around. This is going to be the order that it creates that wizard, or that legend in. So I can have a legend title. I can, this just selects the different types of borders that I want to have a border around it. If I want to have background, and if I want to have shadow, all this is through there, and it's going to default. And so now I've created a wizard. And once again, this is why we took the time to make the labels on our graduated symbol and our graduated colors, because these are going to show up within our legend. So all good maps have to have a north arrow. There's lots of different types of north arrows. Right? We can just create one, zoom in there. This is all things that we can size. So it's showing that our north is up. The other thing is some things have scale and some things don't. I mean, within GIS, everything is stored in a scale, but it's sort of up to us whether or not we want to include a scale bar in our map. If we want people to realize the size of things, there's lots of different versions to it. We can put this in here. So this is just showing, the 200 miles. If I scale it down, right, it's going to adjust. This is a dynamic feature. So I may want to get it down to where it shows 100 miles, and it's going to show all that. But I get some problems with the text, so usually you see it kind of even. So this one's nice because it shows the 25, 50. Right? and put that in there. Some other features is dynamic text. So these are things that are saved with the file, right? So current date, current time, this is every time it's printed, it would be updating my username, all this. I want to pull the coordinate system information. So this is saying all this is, so remember we selected that this is projected in the state plane Washington South, and it has a bunch of information about that projection system, and we're going to spend more time in lecture talking about that. So through all this, the other part is I want to put a source, right? I can put some additional text in here. Selecting that, I put it right there. So I'm showing information about population that is all coming from the U.S. Census Bureau. And so this tells the person looking at my map not only the projection, which is important when you're dealing with a scale bar and pulling measurement from it, but this also tells the reader where the population information came from, right? I could also even go in there and say, this is, I believe, 2000. This is from the U.S. Census Bureau 2000 census or something like that. So it's good practice to always have these elements with the legend, certainly the north arrow, your projection system. Like I said, we're going to talk more about that in class, and then having some sort of source that goes along with it. Step 21 of GIS Lab 2. For this step, we're going to be adding reports to the layout, but we'll also be using GIS to sort of query data and export it that we could use in Excel. And actually, I think making charts and reports in Excel is easier, but you can use the same step to be able to export query data from it. So make sure that you're in the data view, so as opposed to the paper view or the layout view, you want to be over here in the data view. Under the Washington counties, go ahead and bring up the open attribute table. So your data might be arranged differently, but mine looks like it's alphabetically. It's showing the 39 counties and all done based on the name of the county. There's also another name category over here where it just has the second part for county. But I'm going to go ahead and freeze this, so that freezes that column. So as I scroll over, I'll always be able to see that first column, the name. And I want to look for that population 10 column over here, which contains the population information. If I sort descending, it's going to sort from the highest population county, which is King, all the way down to the lowest population county, which is Garfield. If I select the first 5, just by highlighting them over here on the left side, I'll see the top 5 population counties in Washington, and go ahead and close. Like we did in the first lab, you'll see that those counties are now highlighted using the selection highlight. If I go back to the paper view, I still see that they're selected, but I need to be back in this layout view for me to go to the view, and I want to view reports. Create report. Let it work through, and it's going to, a report wizard is going to come up here in a second. Okay, with the report wizard, it'll default to the counties, the layer that I was last working with, but I could change it up here if I wanted to use a different attribute table. But I want to create the fields that the report is going to pull from, and so I'm going to use the name. I can either use the long name or the short name, and I select it, and I also want it to have population 10. So I put it over here, right? And then I hit next. Oh, if I go back, sorry, this is an important step. If I go back, there's also a data set options. If I select that, if I had just kept going with next, it would create a report of all the data. I want to just create a report with the data of the selected set. So it's going to only use, create a report for those 5 counties that I selected. Hit next. I can add additional sort of hierarchy to it. I could, if I had more data, I could work with the report wizard to put it into sort of subsets or categories. Then here it's going to talk about how it sorts the field. So I could sort it by name or I could sort it by population. And I want to sort it in descending. So this is going to create a report or a table inside my layout where I have the population from the highest to the lowest of those selected counties. I'm just going to use the default of the stepped one, but you can look at some of the other options for layout. It'll tell me whether to put the table portrait or landscape. I think for the type, I think I want to use the Monaco, which is kind of the simplest of the report formats, but you can just click on different ones to see what looks best. What do you want to title it? Washington County Population. Be sure to have the preview on. And so you'll see what it looks like in this format. To make some additional changes, go up to Edit. And this will show you, if you've done much in Microsoft Access, you'll see that this report format for GIS looks a lot like the Access database. But this is the title. I could go in and change it in here if I wanted to change the title of it. This is the report header, so this is what it's going to show at the beginning of each of those columns, and it just reverts back to the actual column within the GIS table. But you might want to, if you highlight on it, you can go over to this view over here and change it to county name and population. And for the details over here, so this is where it's going to put all the data, and it would format it however you wanted according to how many records that you had. Okay, we can get rid of the footer, just so we don't need to see the page number. We want it to be a pretty simple table, and then the last thing we'll hit save. And there's different, it'll save it as a report layout file, but we want to just make sure it goes back to your Z drive in your personal file. Okay, so we'll close out of that. Okay, after it's saved, just run the report, and you'll see that it creates the report with all the changes that we made, including the data. So the next thing that we want to do is go ahead and up here select this export report. We can change it as a PDF, but we can also export it as a spreadsheet. And as I said, GIS is kind of clunky at analyzing data, and I think it's easier sometimes just to export it out to Excel. Certainly for the charting function, export it out to Excel, create your charts like you're used to in Excel, and then import it back in. So we'll hit OK. In there, and then so when I had saved it, I forgot to put the extension .xls, so I had to go back and rename this and put the .xls. It is an older Excel format that it exports it in, so be sure not to save it as a XLSX, but make sure it's just the older .xls. But when I bring up that file, you'll see that it exported it. It's not perfect. It's always a little bit messy and you have to change things around, but you guys should be pretty familiar with changing things into number formats. And then from here, you can just Control-C and Control-V to get your table. And it'll be a single object that you'll be able to move around and get it to be somewhere nice in your file. So originally I had directions in here for how to create charts within ArcGIS, but if you think that creating reports and tables in GIS is a little bit awkward, it's like 10 times worse for creating charts. So I just don't think that anybody familiar with Excel would ever choose to do it that way. So with that, this is the end of the lab, and you're given a lab assignment where you're going to create both a choropleth and use symbology, and but you should have all the steps to do that. If there's any questions, send me an email and I will be happy to answer them. Thanks.